Good day, Sir Ian. I'm going to present my thesis titled Exploring the Dimensions of Loneliness and Solitude in Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner. Loneliness and solitude are often misconstrued by many in today's world, not knowing that these have different meanings and effects on an individual self. On the one hand, loneliness is spurred by many factors such as self-doubt. It could express itself in many forms, psychologically and physically. In addition, one of the primary factors of this experience for the self of an individual is the fear of love and lack of trust. On the other hand, solitude is not as same as loneliness, for it differs how this situation affects an individual. It is experienced by an individual when he is away from society, distractions, and the miseries in the society. However, the concept of solitude is complex, for it can have positively connotative meanings and negatively connotative meanings. The concepts of loneliness and solitude are foregrounded in Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner. Thus, this thesis argues that in Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner, the primary themes of loneliness and solitude are highly evident and demonstrated through the central character Amir, as the novel unveils the nature of the solitude of the self. Hence, this study aims to answer the following questions. Number one, what are the instances that manifest Amir's loneliness and sense of solitude in The Kite Runner? Number two, what are the factors that attribute to Amir's solitude? And lastly, number three, how does the novel unveil the solitude of the self through the character of Amir? Next. This study covers the main character of the Kite Runner, Amir, and the implications of his actions that aid the demonstrations of loneliness and solitude in the novel. In addition, it discusses the foregrounded concepts and the positively and negatively connotative meanings of solitude. Moreover, this study utilizes a qualitative, descriptive, analytical method in order to foreground the concepts of loneliness and solitude in The Kite Runner. Furthermore, the theory used is reader response criticism that argues that the reader must intervene in order to provide further interpretation of The Kite Runner. Thus, this theory is utilized to make the reader give a deliberate examination and an analytical approach to the text. Furthermore, there is no wrong or right answer because it is primarily based on the reader's analytic interpretation or approach of the text. Moving on. 2.1 on the philosophy of loneliness. This explains the various definitions of loneliness retrieved from the works of Peplau, Lederer, Koch, Forbes, Singh, Burris, and Frohnau. Furthermore, there are several definitions of loneliness mentioned in this subhead, as it illustrates the psychological and physical implications and how this concept is spurred by several factors. As such, Peplau stated that loneliness is an unnoticed inability to do anything when alone. Similarly, Schnitzler's subject Lederer stated that it is not identical with aloneness nor necessarily caused by it. However, it is rather caused by the inability to share one's own ideas and emotions, to give of oneself, by the unwillingness to belong to anybody, and the lack of anybody one can truly call one's own. Also, Burry stated that loneliness arises in us uninvited. Moreover, Koch describes loneliness as an unpleasant feeling of longing for some kind of interaction with another person. On the other hand, Singh describes loneliness as the byproduct of both the inner dynamics and feelings of an individual and the social-cultural value systems and networking of relationships. Forbes, however, utilizes it in the medical field and defines it as essentially undesirable and may give implications for the health of an individual who experiences loneliness. Lastly, Fernald's description of loneliness is something shameful, and the sharp, bitter awareness of a fact we would rather not be so conscious of. Hence, the definitions and descriptions of loneliness could have similar and various meanings from the aforesaid authors. Next, 2.2 Complexities of Solitude. The concept of solitude has negatively and positively connotative meanings, and these meanings are retrieved from the works of Wilgus, Gazellenland, and Tihan, from which they have subjects who also further illustrated the concept of solitude. As stated in the article of Wilgus, solitude is not as same being alone because according to his subject Thoreau, one can never be completely alone. Furthermore, solitude can be attained whether individual is with the companion of others or not, as stated by the subject of Wilgus' article, Thoreau, that solitude is not measured by the miles of space that intervene between a man and his fellows. In the case of Ghazal and Lal, they use the concept of solitude in the psychological aspect of childhood, by the internal state, as they define that anxious solitude is characterized by the internal state of social anxiety, including shyness, verbal inhibition, and playing alone while watching peers play. Tihan, on the other hand, utilized solitude as the mind embracing detachment, isolation, and emptiness. Moreover, this solitude fosters selflessness, deeply recognizes finitude, and assists in recovering the authentic self, thus preparing the soul for mystical union with God. Next, the distinction between loneliness and solitude. This subhead juxtaposes the concepts loneliness and solitude and gives an analytical view and summary of the aforesaid subheadings. Overall, this subhead elucidated that loneliness is a negative experience while solitude is the positive counterpart. Lastly, synthesis. This is the recapitulation of the primary ideas of the concepts loneliness and solitude. This subhead mentioned the implications, origin of loneliness, and its meanings. On the contrary, it mentioned the complex meanings of solitude and how it is used in other aspects. Moving on, manifestations of loneliness and solitude 3.1. This analytical point consolidates each of the given instances of loneliness through the self of Amir along the narrative in the novel. The longing to be with his father Baba, the death of Amir's mother, the assumption that Baba holds a grudge against him, the time he wants consolation from someone, the times he wants to give his best not to disappoint Baba. On the other hand, this analytical point gives a glimpse of solitude of the self of Amir in the novel's narrative, such as Amir's birthday celebration. Next is factors of solitude 3.2. This analytical point renders the factors that attribute to the solitude of Amir, such as the death of Baba, driving to the gravesite of Baba, and his venture to his homeland Afghanistan due to his sick uncle, which is Rahim Khan, and to save Sarab, the son of his half-brother Hassan. Last of the three is unveiling the solitude of the self 3.3. This analytical point summarizes the instances provided in the second analytical subhead and reifies that solitude affects the self through the character of Amir from the beginning and to the end of the narrative. To add, it renders an evidence which foreshadows the instance of solitude that affects Amir later on in the novel's narrative. Thus, the instances provided indeed unveil the solitude of Amir as his behavior changes toward the end of the novel and becomes the father figure after the death of his father Baba. Moreover, the events in the winter of 1975 is mentioned for this indicates the manifestations of solitude of the self through the character of Amir. Finally, this part of the study briefly illustrates the analytical subheadings that answer the three questions raised by this study. Thus, it summarizes the instances of loneliness in the narrative of the novel through the self of Amir, the desire of closeness of Amir to be with Baba, the demise of his mother, the act of blaming himself for the death of his mother, the feeling of separateness, and the feeling of indifference. Similarly, this part of the study summarizes the factors that attribute to the solitude of Amir: death of Baba, Amir's contemplation on the things he has to do without his father, his visit to Rahim Khan, and his venture to his homeland Afghanistan to save Sohrab. To sum up, all the rendered instances are high demonstrations of loneliness and solitude that are evident in Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner through the character of the self of Amir.